Hi, I'm Jennifer Holberg. I'm a professor in the Calvin English department, and along with Jane Zwart, I am the co-director of the Calvin Center for Faith and Writing. And joining me today is Sarah Arthur, one of the good friends of the festival for a long time and a much published author. You may know Sarah's work on Madeleine. Her recent book was called A Light So Lovely, but she has over a dozen books that range from devotionals to literary analysis. She's a journalist. She is a graduate of Wheaton and Duke Divinity and has a lot of expertise in youth ministry and is just an all-around good person. So we wanted to give you a chance to hear from Sarah today, and we're going to just have a short conversation about publishing. And so, Sarah, welcome. It's so great to see you today.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. It's too bad it's not in person. We're
I
just an
know.
hour apart. I'm over in Lansing, but
I know. I've
oh
been
well,
missing
here
seeing
we are.
everyone. Yeah, about a year from now, whenever you're watching this, March 24th, we'll be having Festival 2022. So I hope
Can't wait.
that'll be a wonderful homecoming, I think, and a
Oh,
wonderful
for
reunion
sure.
for all of us. So Sarah, given all that background, Divinity School and so many other things, how did you talk to us a little bit about your path into publishing?
Yeah, well, like many of the viewers, I was an English major in undergrad. And I think, like many of you, my parents were a little worried about what that would mean. So I also had a double major in Christian education, to do church ministry kinds of things. And so following when I graduated from Wheaton, I did go into youth ministry full time for about 7 years, and in northern Michigan at a fairly large mainline church.
Yeah.
And while I loved it, and there are components of teaching in particular, I loved like confirmation class, and I loved um, when I watched students, wake up to a Bible story, especially, or a moment in the liturgy, or a moment in the church calendar. There was part of me, like the creative side of me, that was the I needed time alone. I needed time away. I needed time um, to just be inside my own head for a while in that creative space. And youth ministry was really hard for that.
Mhm.
If I was reading anything, it was to like prepare for the small group that I was doing on, The Silver Chair by C.S. Lewis with a bunch of junior high kids, instead of just reading it because I wanted to read it.
Mhm.
So that was a tough season towards the end of that, where I began to realize I'm sensing a call away from this, which is really hard when you're doing good work and it feels like God's work. Um, at that same time, I had started to write some curriculum for my denomination and around youth ministry stuff, and learned a ton about publishing by just being
Mhm.
like, I mean, I'd been writing fiction as a young person all the way through, but to learn the nuts and bolts of the publishing industry from a different side of it, where in my mind the stakes weren't that high.
Mhm.
It's
Right.
like I'm helping my denomination flourish
Right.
and provide resources, but man, I learned about deadlines and different editors within the industry and what roles they
Mhm.
play and what power an author has or doesn't have. I learned about like, oh, this isn't my material. I'm a work for
Mhm.
hire. So the copyright isn't in my name. It belongs to the publisher, and they're going to change it, whatever they want, and they don't even have to run it by me.
Right.
And I get paid, a set fee for this project. And when it's done, it's done. And bye, baby, go have fun. It's not really
Mhm.
mine anymore. But man, I learned a ton.
Yeah.
So that when I began to sense that it was time for me to pull back from full-time ministry and explore some other things, I don't know. I was like, I'll scoop ice cream. I don't know what God wants me to do. But I went off to a writing conference.
Mhm.
It was called the Right to Publish conference, actually held on Wheaton's campus.
Okay.
I don't know if it's still around, but lots of editors and agents and stuff were there. And I signed up for a spot with an editor from
Mm.
Tyndale in the kids unit. Sat down with her. I had no idea what I was doing. I had hand printed, like I had printed off my business cards on my home printer and like cut them myself, um, to look legit. And I had some ideas. And she was what happened was we struck up a rapport around youth ministry resources. Like she was like, "Oh, you've been in youth ministry. Tell me what students are reading." And
Mm.
in my 15 minutes, I didn't really talk a lot about what I write. I
Mhm.
learned more about what that publisher was looking for.
Yeah, that seems so important. I mean, so can you talk a little bit about it as sort of that as a tip? I mean, so you
Hmm.
had so many kind of buried in there right then.
Yeah.
Some
Yep.
of
We
it
can back up
was
and go through
some
lots
of
of
it
them.
was sort
Hmm.
of like right into the spaces that you're in.
Yes.
Um,
Yep.
thinking about those audiences and the ways I think sometimes people don't think about the fact that they already do know some audiences better than other people,
And
right?
that you're maybe an expert already, like if
Mhm.
you've been involved in something for 3 to 4-ish years,
Mhm.
you have a lot of knowledge about that.
Right.
And 7 years in youth ministry is a lot of knowledge, particularly about that audience.
Right.
And a publisher wanted to know what I knew in that
Hmm.
moment, right?
Yeah. And to
Hmm.
think about how then to write for that well is
Hmm.
something that's the role of the editor to help you see kind of what your own skills are. I also thought
Hmm.
it was
Hmm.
interesting the way you were talking about what you learned about the business side,
Hmm.
and the ways in which I think sometimes, especially those maybe of us who are more creative writing, we've done it since we were
Oh,
little kids,
oh, I was going
you
to be
know.
the next, Catherine Patterson. Like I was gonna, and here I am like writing down, okay, have the students turn to John chapter 1, verses 1
Mhm.
to 4. And
Yeah.
I was like, this is so
You know,
beneath me.
you
But
know
it
what?
wasn't beneath me. It was all
Yeah.
reps. It's like going to basketball practice before you play the
Yeah.
game.
Right. Well, yeah, and you know what's
Mhm.
interesting about Catherine? Catherine's first published work was curriculum.
Yeah. Yep.
And
I've
so I
since
just
learned that. So I've been like,
ah,
okay.
I think that's so
Yep.
fascinating because one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you was the fact that you've written in so many different genres. So
Hmm.
I know you're
Hmm.
writing fiction now and you've
Hmm.
written fiction your whole career, but so
Yeah,
much
it's
of
actually
your
coming back to fiction now
yeah,
after a
but so
big
much of your
long hiatus.
published work is in nonfiction. It's either journalism or it's
Mhm.
biography or it's so talk a little bit about that particular side of the
Mhm.
publishing world.
Mhm.
Maybe what obviously you've been talking about kind of how you ended up there, but what has energized you about being in that space? What are maybe a couple of tips you'd have for the folks watching about writing in nonfiction spaces?
Yeah. Well, I really did go into it thinking I would be a novelist writing for children and teens, right? So some of what I learned, and I had to learn this really early, was to take my cherished things that I was writing or had the ideas to write, and really just open my hand and be
Mhm,
like, let them go,
mhm,
because there may be something else that I'm supposed to be working on, and if I see that opportunity,
mhm,
to really press into that space and see what it has to teach me.
mm,
And my first book was with Tyndale, and it was a book for teens called Walking with Frodo, a devotional journey through the Lord of the Rings. So it was combining a lot of loves, but it's not anything I ever would have
yeah,
dreamt about when I was an English major at Wheaton.
right.
So I pressed into that opportunity, having met that editor. I pitched this to her. Lord of the Rings was in theaters. This tells you how long ago this was. And we had to crank that thing out because it had a cultural hook. So there
Right.
are two things I learned. One was take those things, those beloved things, don't let go of them, but set them to the side and press into the space where you have something to learn and somebody needs something that you have.
Mhm,
Because you can learn in that in ways that translates into these other works. So I
mhm,
started doing devotional books for teens that were connected with these big cultural hooks, these big movies based on great literature. So The Hobbit and the Lord of, like, the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. I was like, I love talking about this stuff, so let's do it. But it was with this particular hook with students
yeah.
because that had been my past. Well, people wanted more of this, and
Mhm,
the shift then became devotional books for college and career, for older people. and then Literary Guides to Prayer with Paraclete Press, where I'm the anthologist compiling other people's poetry and fiction, kind of like the curator of an exhibit,
Mhm.
to say this is a space where God is working, is in the realm of the imagination.
Mhm.
And it's okay to have some guides. Like,
Mhm.
yes, we want to read broadly on our own and kind of form our own
Right.
opinions. But there's also, as every English teacher knows and professor like yourself, like a guided tour of this literature is also really powerful, and can be spiritually formative. So that's
Yeah.
the space I've inhabited. It led to things like the book, the spiritual biography of Madeleine L'Engle, A Light So
Mhm.
Lovely, um, and co-directing now the Madeleine L'Engle Conference and some other extroverted side
Yeah.
gigs. um,
Yeah, but it's so fascinating how, I
fun.
do think sometimes people think it's this very, it's a, even the metaphors we use, right? It's a path or but
Mm.
really it's sort of way leads to way, right?
Yes, way
And
leads to way, and guides lead to guides too. So
mhm,
I've been in this industry since 1999. That's when I started
mhm,
writing curriculum. And the colleagues that have moved all over the place to different
yeah,
publishers and different, some are agents now.
mhm,
And so you maintain those connections, and all of a sudden the door that you had wanted to go through 20 years ago
mhm,
is now open in a different way. And it's like,
right.
oh, yeah. I mean, my agent that I have,
Mhm.
I've never had an agent before, read my books when she was in middle school.
Wow.
And like a friend of mine said, she's like, it's like you custom designed an agent for yourself. She's awesome. I mean, she's
Yeah,
not just because she read my stuff, but she's a resonator, to
right.
quote, um, oh, Diana Glyer talks about this with the Inklings. She's a resonator, and you meet these resonators throughout the industry, and you got to stay in touch, because you never know where way leads to way and guide leads to guide.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that you're highlighting that is so important is this idea of being in conversation,
Hmm.
not with texts, right? So the way
Hmm.
that you were in conversation with some of these classical texts, in the
Yep.
anthologies that you've done, that you've been you're as the guide, you've been in conversation with these works.
Yeah.
And so
And
now
the
it's
and
like,
the artists too. I mean, like the
right.
poets have become
Yeah,
friends and colleagues. The
that's kind of what I
contemporary
mean is
reader
that
writers. Mhm.
by reading these things, some of them with living people and some of them with,
Mhm. Mhm.
John Donne or whatever. But there's a sense in which we're that writing books or publishing or conferences or all the work you're doing in some ways is all very similar because it's inviting people into a conversation, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's
Yep.
the youth in a youth group or whether it's at the Madeleine L'Engle conference, right? It's like
That's so helpful. I'm
come
not
and
that like
talk
a
with us. Mhm.
yeah, not just a writer, but a convener of
Yeah,
conversations, which I
right.
see Calvin doing so well also.
Yeah.
And I learn a lot from those spaces, like
Mhm.
entering the Festival of Faith and Writing spaces. And I may think I'm there for a certain reason, but some
Yeah.
of it is just listening in, right? And being receptive and thinking, okay, this is all continuing ed for me personally, and it's going to go on for the rest of my life. And
Yeah.
there will never be a point where I'm the expert in the
Right.
room who has no more to learn.
Right.
And yeah.
And so much so interesting, so many interesting things out of conversation, which is something I think our culture is so hungry for now because we're so bad at it.
Hmm.
Right. I
And so
was,
isolated,
yeah,
right?
right.
The second thing I was thinking about when I look back, you asked me kind of more broadly as I look back on my
Mhm.
career. Um, and a really big buzzword now that wasn't a buzzword when I started was the word platform.
Mm,
Because just your online presence, like we were building my website. My husband was building my website as I was writing my first book because we knew I needed something. You wouldn't get away with that now.
mhm.
As a writer, you would need to demonstrate that you have an online presence, are engaging in social media, etc. But the gatekeepers who have begun to use that as a reason to not publish people, like their following just isn't big enough, their platform's not big enough. And my secret sauce with that has been to put my baby toe on somebody else's platform and ride that elevator right on up.
Mhm.
So Frodo
Mhm.
and The Lord of the Rings, Jane Austen, C.S. Lewis, Madeleine L'Engle, and not because I want the attention on me, but because there's a tribe of people out there that are looking for what you're doing, and they
Right.
happen to resonate in that space with those authors. And so like I'm not well known,
Mhm.
but the people I write about are.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so that is a community of people that I want to connect with. And so I don't get my all uptight about platform, because
Mhm.
if you're convening conversations,
Mhm.
then you're reaching people through other people's platforms. And
Right.
the more colleagues you have who help amplify each other's work is the same principle.
Yeah. And I think
And
that's so
then the
important.
journalism piece of, writing for major publications like Christianity Today. I'm a preliminary fiction judge now for
Mhm.
Christianity Today, and I've done
Yeah, I
that for
saw
five
that. That's so
years.
cool.
It's a great, it's a fun gig. I get to be kind of behind the scenes, but then I write all kinds of stuff for CT about
Mhm.
books and writing, and I interview authors, and
Right.
again, that conversation spreads beyond my own, individual platform.
I
um,
think that's
a
so
tough case to
helpful.
make to a publisher, but I think it takes the pressure off the individual writer, because it's like,
Mhm.
it's not all you really.
Right.
And to build that kind of following,
Mhm.
what you really want to do is write,
Mhm.
can be, you just got to pick, what is it that I'm going to pour my energy into?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's so helpful because I hear so often people who are beginning writers who are just very, very put off by that and they don't know how to
Mhm.
do that. And what would they possibly
Mhm.
do on Twitter that would attract thousands of followers? And so I think
They'd be
the way,
better joining an MFA program where all of those students go on to
Mhm.
amplify each other's work,
Right,
honestly.
right.
Like, if you're going
And
to
I
pour
think
your
that's so
energy into anything.
important, the ways in which we do think though consciously in conversations about that amplification, right?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
how
And
is it that
who are we amplifying,
yeah.
and at what time and in what
Mhm.
spaces,
Yep.
and being good stewards of that.
Yeah, I think
Hmm.
that's exactly right. And I've always thought it's really important. I know there are also people maybe watching who are just friends of writers.
Hmm.
And I've always thought that the appreciator is so important, right?
Yes.
The retweeter,
Oh, yeah.
the person who isn't
It's a
maybe ever going to write
resonator.
something themselves, right?
Hmm.
Exactly. And I
Hmm.
think so if you have great books that you've been reading, if you know authors that are doing a great job, I love to see recommendations and my
Hmm.
friend's
Hmm.
poems are great, like you should
Yep.
read them, or whatever. So I just think that if we can think about those different models of conversation and connections and all of those
Hmm. Hmm.
amplifications, those are really the metaphors we want. You
Yeah.
mentioned earlier just really briefly about your agent, and how you
Uh-huh.
have this kind of wonderful agent. Talk to me about agents. So you said you didn't have one for a long spell. Now
Hmm.
you have one. What would your advice be about agents?
A lot has to do with what genre you're writing in and what publishers you're going after.
Mhm.
There are a lot of publishers who, um, especially within Christian publishing, who are a bit more accessible. It's a smaller press. It's not as hard to break into those spaces without an agent being the one to help open that door. It's probably harder now. Um, in some ways than it might have been when I got started, but conferences are where you can get those connections, whether it's with agents or editors. For me, conferences have been where I've met at least three of the editors that I've ended up
Mhm.
publishing with, if not more. I'm trying to remember.
Mhm.
Um, and it has its own gravity. I mean, once you've published and you prove that
Mhm.
you've got
Sure.
more to it, starts to, I don't have to work as hard in the nonfiction Christian sphere.
Right.
uh, You
Right.
know, Fiction in the trade market, if I aspire to be the next Catherine Patterson, the New York publishing world does not know how to talk to you without an agent. They
Mhm.
really don't. They
Mhm.
really don't. And some of the imprints now of the bigger five publishers, that are the like religious imprints, whether it's like Crown Publishing Group that does it is a imprint of Penguin Random House, and underneath them are some of those. Convergent, for instance, is a Christian that, again, they just don't know how to interact with you without an agent.
Mhm.
Um, so so I've learned that slowly with my fiction. I would need one.
Mhm.
And it's taken a couple years of probing here and there, meeting agents at conferences, trying to figure out what's a good connection. Some of them have left their agency right in the middle of the
Mhm.
conversation, or were like, I'm not an agent anymore.
Yeah.
Or one of them's like, got really sick and I didn't know why I didn't hear from her for 8 months, kind of thing.
Mhm.
So you're in it for the long haul. You've got to just lean into the
Mhm.
awkward, tough. It's hard.
Yeah.
And
So,
just understand that it's like not going to happen immediately.
yeah.
And it's just constantly, and it's okay to tell people, hey, I'm looking for an agent. Like I put that in a blog post, and my agent, who's been reading those since she was in high school, reading my newsletters, was like, wait a minute, I'm an agent
Mhm.
now. I didn't know you were writing fiction.
Right. Right.
I would love to represent you. Also, I can't believe you have never had an agent. It's like
Yeah.
6 publishers. Like, yeah, that's kind of weird.
Yeah, but I mean, I do think you're right. The Christian publishing space maybe has been a little bit different, and as it's evolving,
Hmm.
it's maybe requiring more of that. What are you looking for in a good agent? I mean, it always has
Oh,
felt to me a little bit like someone like a sort of almost a marriage, right? You
yeah,
got to
you're dating.
trust them and all of that.
That,
Maybe that's a
yeah,
bad metaphor.
no, it is kind of, I think that's not a terrible metaphor because it does kind of feel like you're dating a little bit. Because you do need to trust this person. You need to know. I think the biggest thing for me, and this made the difference between my current agent Alice and some of the other people I interacted with, was cheering on me as a person,
Mm,
not just a particular project of mine.
hmm.
And being ready to engage my ideas, but also being like, hey, COVID's rough, and you've got 2 little kids at home, and I'm
Hmm.
not expecting miracles here,
Hmm.
which is good because
Yeah.
so, but also like circling back and being like, hey, how are you doing? I'm just checking in.
Hmm. Yeah.
um
So you
and
sort of need
not
an ad.
everybody's
Yeah.
going to have an agent who grew up reading your books,
Right.
who's who's been deeply formed by
Yeah.
reading your work.
Yeah.
Um,
But
that
somebody who's an
is
advocate, it's,
who's a resonator, like I said
mhm,
before, and an
yeah.
advocate of you as a person.
Hmm.
You're
Yeah.
not just a commodity. You're not just dollar signs to that person.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and that it's a relationship, right? That
Mm-hmm,
you're going to have
mm-hmm.
to encourage me on my bad days and
Yep.
talk me down when I'm being too ambitious, right? I mean, it
Well,
does feel
that
like,
and like tell me the truth about my writing,
hmm,
but in a way that doesn't just like completely shut me down.
right.
Like, but provide some suggested solutions of ways
Hmm.
through, that fit with who I am, and
Yeah.
yeah, it's don't fix the problem for me,
Hmm.
but give me a roadmap for what are some good next steps.
Right.
And an agent is also, their job isn't necessarily to help you build your brand, but there's more of that going on in the agent
Hmm.
relationship too. And if they don't get you, they're not going to get
Hmm.
what sort of brand for yourself, or
Right.
mission and vision is, what you're really about.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have maybe one or two other kind of broad tips that you think as beginning writers, what were things you wish you would have known
Mm.
that are kind of your one or two like final tips for us today? However you want to go with that question.
That's a really interesting question. Um, I I feel like there's just something to get used to in the publishing world, is that there's this kind of magic pixie dust
Mm.
that gets sprinkled arbitrarily, and don't take it personally
Mm.
if, like the project that you wished would have done well doesn't do well, or the project that you really didn't care a whole lot about is now everybody's favorite and you're having to interview about it.
Yeah.
um, or or like a friend of yours wrote something that you wish you would have written and they do really well.
Hmm.
It is so arbitrary. It's like winter in Michigan. Like you just can't take it personally. It's just like somebody's going to get dumped on and somebody's going to get nothing. And it's just, I
Hmm.
don't even know how to explain it. I can't even explain it by the work of the Holy Spirit because it really
Right.
is baffling. There
Hmm.
are incredibly gifted authors out there who have done everything right. They've checked off everything on the list
Hmm.
and they're getting no traction at all. And
Right.
it feels cruel and like what is going on? And then there are other people whose attention, it's like they get it and they do great and they're saving the world, and it's like you read their stuff and you're like,
Yeah.
so I just think like just do whatever you're feeling prompted to do.
Hmm.
Listen to the people who love you,
Hmm.
um, in the publishing world, right? Like just continue to find the mentors that are a good fit, who are going to help you keep doing that clear roadmap, for your work,
Hmm.
within your gifts. And again, it's just that releasing, because it is so unpredictable.
Yeah.
It's so unpredictable.
Yeah. That's such a good
That's
point. Hmm.
I'm sorry. I wish I had better, like
Yeah.
like like do these five things and this will work out.
Hmm.
But it's
Right.
do the best you can with what you feel the bandwidth to pour your energy into, and release, open your hand.
Yep.
Because when they're open, you can receive things too that you didn't even know were out there. So it's like,
Isn't that true?
yeah,
And also that part of what you said earlier that's I think we could end with is just this idea of all the relationships you're building. If this is about
mhm.
relationships, if this is about conversation, if this is about
Your own formation and what you're
right,
learning.
that
Hmm.
even as you maybe are disappointed in your own successes or whatever, and I think you're so right that it does seem sort of capricious.
Oh,
I
it's
mean,
so capricious.
as you look at
My
people who are
first book,
talented,
for
mhm,
no reason at all, was a bestseller in Christian publishing.
yeah.
And I loved it. Walking with Frodo was fun. It was great. It opened so many doors for me. But then, other books that I just adore, that I've
Mhm.
written, that have touched people so deeply, the five people who read it,
Mhm.
um, like nothing. So it's
Yeah,
like, it's just, I have to be like, okay, all of my children are beautiful
right, right.
and
But
they
I
are
think it is
all worth
hard
it,
because
and
yeah.
all, and in ways that I can't anticipate.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, writing is so personal. It's something that,
Mhm.
you thought was important to say, and so it
Mhm.
is funny, I think always what people will resonate with, and as you've pointed out earlier, the cultural moment it comes out in
The
and
cultural moment, what
mhm,
the editor had for lunch. I
right?
mean, it's so capricious.
Right, right.
It's so, and a piece that you know, you've revised based on feedback, send it out again.
Yep.
You know, don't give up on that. You are a competent adult with the
Mhm.
skills to do it.
Yep.
Um, and and
Well, and I will say as
don't
someone
give
who
up.
yeah, as someone who edits a journal, an academic journal, we often see pieces that aren't right for us, but they will be
Mhm.
right for someone.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
I almost always end most of my editorial letters by saying, I hope this feedback will help you as you look for another venue for this piece.
Mhm. Mhm.
Because I have the assumption that there is another venue that this piece will be
Yep.
good. I mean,
Yep.
maybe it's a writing issue, maybe it's a thinking issue, but maybe it's just like we weren't the home for it. But that
Right.
doesn't mean it doesn't
Right.
have a home.
Yeah.
And that if this call is the call, then it'll all be all right. But I think you're right to have that kind of approach to it is sort of going in and reminding of yourself as often as you can about that. Sarah, talk to me a little bit about like your late I know we talked I mentioned the Madeleine Lingo book, which is
Mhm.
still available for purchase.
Yep.
A Light So Lovely. End up just one final thing about what you're working on right now.
Well, I'm working on making sure my kids make it to the end of the year remote learning, second and fourth graders who have been home
Right.
for 374 days.
Yes, God bless
Not
you.
nobody's counting this, of course. But yeah, so my agent is, I've been working on young adult and middle grade fiction for a long time, and she's
Wonderful.
been beginning to shop some of that with me. And when we get feedback, we work on revisions and keep
Mhm.
keep plugging at it. So um, I I'm pretty sure by the end of this year to that I will have a fiction contract. We're pretty determined pair, so
Yeah.
and it's been fun, and I've done a lot of good work to fix up my stuff. So
Well, that's
um,
exciting.
yeah, hopefully
Yeah,
I'll
we'll
have
look
some
forward to
good
that.
news for everyone.
And for people who want to read more about you, I believe it's saraharthur.com. Is that
It is saraharthur.com, and I'm revamping all that, but that's where they can learn
okay?
about all my Madeleine L'Engle stuff
Right.
and my other resources as well.
Yeah, I will tell you when I was mentioning the some of your Madeleine L'Engle work to my sister, she was like, "Wait, I have a book by her we've been using for our family devotion," and I'm like, "Yep, that's her."
Yeah,
So my sister
yeah,
was, I got major points in my
that's funny.
family because I knew that Sarah
That's
Arthur.
Sarah Arthur.
So
Yeah,
that Sarah Arthur, we're so pleased and thankful for your long association with us at the Center for Faith and Writing. We're
it's an
excited
honor.
to read your new stuff and hope people will check out some of the other things that you've written and find a conference near them. Maybe
Yes.
the Festival of Faith and Writing, but there's lots of great conferences all over the country, including Madeleine L'Engle
Mhm.
conferences that you can check out online as well. But lots of great places to connect. So we hope to see you all soon. Thanks so much, Sarah.
It was an honor. Thank you, Jennifer.